welcome back to the Obsession Engineering Garage, where I'm on with a little bit of Project Tuono. I'm still waiting for a new stator to arrive for it, so I'm just going through and doing a few little tidy up service jobs. So I've bled the clutch up already, and now I'm measuring the chain. So to measure the chain for stretch and thus wear, I have this rather fantastic little Zubaki tool. So what we've done is I've put the bike in gear, and if I just pop that there and drop that in there, if I put a little bit of tension on the chain as well, we can see that the green section of the gauge has disappeared into the roller, and it's not actually far off going into the red zone. So you can see there's actually quite a lot of play in the green zone. So if the chain was new, the green zone wouldn't even go in. And if it gets to the point where the red zone goes in, it really is desperate for changing. So I think it's best if I put a new chain on this. So that's another thing to put on the list. The next little job I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these crash bungs, because I think they're horrible. And yes, they might be fairly practical if you drop your bike, but I mean, you're still going to damage other bits, and I just think they look horrendous. And because I have long legs, I have a tendency when I ride with stuff this big to knock my shins against them. So I'm going to take these off, check exactly what length bolts we need, and then I can get to the right bolts to replace them. I think it looks much better without those slightly ridiculous crash mushrooms on it. So they're off. And I also found this is the original rear brake sort of holding plate, but this bike's got different rear sets on it to relocate the mass cylinder up here so it's away from the exhaust and doesn't need bleeding every week. But the bracket was still fitted, so I've taken the bracket off, and behind it is this lovely piece of wiring with gaffer tape wrapped around it. So I'm going to split that, and I'm going to take it apart and heat shrink it so it looks a bit better and has more chance of not falling apart. So today, after days and days of waiting, my new stator has turned up. And I say new, I'd managed to get it cheap on eBay because somebody had bought it, realised it was for the wrong bike, and then sold it again. So it's new but not brand new, if that sort of makes sense. Anyway, I'm going to try and fit that and see if we can make it have life in it. I think it's fairly easy to tell which is the new one and which is the old one. Yeah, that one's cream crackered, and that one's shiny and new. So I'm going to take the cover back off that I just put on to stop anything falling in the hole, and bolt the stator into the cover and refit it into the engine. So I've got the stator bolted in, I've got the little guide tucked down there that stops the cable getting rubbed by the rotor. I've cleaned up all the mating faces and I've cleaned out the actual cover. So now I'm just going to double check that the face on the engine is clean, put a new gasket on and bolt this onto the engine. So I've got my gasket on, I've cleaned the face up first, and there's only one dowel, so what I tend to do is smear grease on both sides of the gasket, so partly it stays stuck to the engine, and if for some reason you have to take it off again before it's run for too long, you've got a fighting chance of it coming apart without breaking. So the next thing is I'm going to lift that up and guide it on here, but when the magnet in the rotor attracts the stator, it will pull it on quite sharply, so you've got to keep your fingers out of the way. That's the cover refitted. It was actually quite awkward, and I ended up actually cable tying some of the cables out of the way here so they didn't get trapped behind it. The next thing is this plug. These plugs are notorious for not really being able to pass enough current. So what I'm going to do is cut it off and solder the wires together. So I've got my side cutters out and I will lop the end off. There we go, that's that improved. So I just need to feed that through the bike because it runs through the middle of the V, which is a little bit awkward, and then I can solder it up at the other end. As if by magic, the wires are reconnected, but this time they're hardwired soldered and heat shrunk, so they're nice and tidy. So I'm just going to sort of tuck them into the bike, and then I can put the petrol tank on. Oh, well, I suppose I better put oil in it, and then see if it actually runs. Before I try and start it, putting oil in it's probably a good idea, so I've got some Motul 5100 semi-synthetic in 1550, because they don't really need fully synthetic in these, and I've got to pour it into the oil tank. Now, on most motorbikes, the oil is kept in the sump underneath the engine, But these are weird. It's a dry sump system, so it's got the oil tank up the side here. Makes the engine a little bit more compact. It also makes them considerably more awkward to set the oil level. So what I've got to do is pour in 3.7 litres, they say, but I'm going to put a little bit less in to begin with. So a bit over 3 litres into it. Then you have to start the bike, assuming it actually starts, and run it for, well, they actually say to go and ride it for a few minutes, so it's really hot, then come back, stop it for a couple of minutes, put it on a level surface, and the oil should be halfway up the tube, which strikes me as a proper faff to set an oil level. So I'm going to put oil in it, at least spin the engine over so it moves a bit of the oil around the engine, and then just sort of estimate it a bit. Right, so I've got 3 litres of oil in, and the oil's nearly at the top of the sight glass. But at the moment there's no oil in the engine, because when I turn the engine over, one oil pump will suck the oil into the engine and through the oil filter and sort of fill up a few of the little holes in the engine. But then there's a second oil pump that pumps the oil sort of from the bottom of the crankcase back into the oil tank via the oil coolers. So at the moment, half of the system's got no oil in it. Are you with me? Are you with me? Yeah, see what I'm saying? It's a slightly odd system. So what I'm going to do now is before I connect the fuel tankers, I'm going to turn the bike on and spin the engine over a bit to try and get some of the oil around the engine before I go for a proper start. I've had the engine spinning over on the starter motor for probably 10 to 15 seconds, maybe even a little bit more. And as you can see, bit by bit, it's sucked the oil down out of here and it's pumped it round, well, everywhere. So some of it will possibly drain back into here from the oil coolers. They are an odd system. In fact, you can see it draining back in now a little bit. So now I know there's actually oil around the engine, I'm going to put the fuel tank back on and actually see if it starts. This is the moment of truth. See if the ultrasonic clean injectors did the trick. See if it actually wants to live. Fuel pump's primed. I was hoping it'd do something. Yeah, that's not brilliant. So what I've done here to get it running is I took the airbox lid off and squirted brake cleaner straight down the inlet, and it fired up, and now that it's running on its own fuel supply. It's a bit smoky because when I did the valve clearances and bits, I've ended up with oil on the exhaust headers and bits. So I'm going to turn it off. Well, at least it runs on 2 cylinders now. Right, I've got the airbox lid back on, got the tank back on. Now that it's run for a little bit and sorted its life out, let's see if it actually starts. Woohoo! I have a running motorbike. I think what I'll do now is I'll run it up to temperature, get it nice and hot, and then see if the oil level's somewhere near. So I've run the bike up to temperature. I've had the fans cutting in and out a couple of times, so everything's pretty hot. The oil coolers have got hot heat in them, so I know the oil's getting everywhere. And after a couple of minutes, we have oil in the tube. So I might pop a little bit more in it because I would generally like a little bit more oil than a little bit less. The other good thing is that we're not overcharging or undercharging. We're charging it just over 14 volts consistently when I rev the bike. So I'd say that's gone pretty well. So I'm going to call that a successful afternoon in the garage. The stator is connected and charging correctly. There's no oil on the floor, which is always a bonus. There is oil in the bike, which is a bonus, and it's sort of the right amount. And the bike actually starts and runs on its own. So we're getting somewhere. There's a couple of little sort of tidy up jobs I'm going to do, and then I will probably take it for an MOT, insure it, and have a little poodle around on the road on it. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time for more Twono fun!